So we started a series last Sunday called Everyone. And it's about how everyone can reach someone. And so we started off this series talking about a couple of really compelling stats, stats that are kind of in opposition to each other, but they're still very true. And it's kind of where we launched off last week. We're going to launch off there again. And the stat we started with last week was this idea that 94% of Christian millennials in the room this morning, let me hear you, okay. Don't be ashamed of that, all right? I'm a millennial, I'm with you. Christian millennials believe that the most transformative experience someone can ever encounter is this discovery of Jesus. And so this was done by Barna Research, and 94% of us said, yeah, I think that is the most transformative thing that a person can experience in their life is meeting Jesus and have a relationship with him. But then this next stat says this, that 47% of us, 50% of us said that we believe that it's actually wrong to share our faith with someone who's not a Christian. And so we started off last week talking about these, this kind of conflict here and these beliefs, how that we believe that it's a great thing, but also on this side, we're like, I don't know if it's good for me to actually tell people about it. And we dove into a little bit of why that is. Some of that comes from some social pressure that maybe we feel to just kind of keep quiet about religion or spiritual things, keep those things to yourself, don't say anything about it. And that may be part of it. The other part of it is probably because some of us experience some kind of cringy ways that Christians over the years have shared their faith. Some pushy ways, kind of assaulting people with the gospel. And so we kind of swung the pendulum all the way to the other side, right? And said, okay, I think it's a good thing, but I just don't think it's a good thing to actually share your faith. And that's kind of where we launched off last week. But we talked about the fact that sharing our faith as a Christian is really something, it's not something we came up with in the last 25 or 50 years and said, hey, maybe we should do this. This is something that has been core to our Christian faith ever since its beginning. This is really the mission of Jesus. So it's not really optional that we could just say, I'm not going to tell anybody about this. It's core to who we are. And so last week we talked about the mission of Jesus, embracing his mission, which we said was to seek and to save the lost. And he was very upfront about that. But it's not enough for us to just say, yeah, I love that as the mission of Jesus, and I appreciate that. We have to go a step further, and we have to embrace his mission as our own, to begin to take ownership of it. And so last week, we set this goal at the beginning of the service. We said, at the beginning of the service last week, we said we wanted each of you to be able to say, I'm embracing the mission of Jesus as my own. I may not fully comprehend it, and I may not execute it flawlessly, but I'm committed to owning it with passion and with a willing heart, okay? Everybody got that? Remember that? If you're new, you're brought up to speed. This week, I've got another goal for us today, okay? We're moving a step further. Here's our goal for the service today. It's a little lengthy, so stay with me, all right? I understand the global mission of Jesus has a local and personal expression in my life. And by faith, I'm believing that the people in my social circles are open to spiritual conversations, that the gospel is truly good news for them, and that Jesus is already at work in their lives. So that's where we're going today, okay? And we're talking about engaging the mission of Jesus in your social circle. If you've got your Bible, open with me to the book of John chapter 4 and verse 35. If you don't have a Bible, you don't have it on your phone, it'll be on the screen. You can follow along there. In John chapter 4, verse 35 is a pretty familiar passage to a lot of us. We referenced it just a few weeks ago on Christmas Eve. We talked about the woman at the well. And this is the context of what's taking place here, that Jesus, his ministry is growing and he's traveling with his disciples, and they're still trying to kind of understand who exactly he is and what his mission is. And he meets this woman at a well, and he has this long conversation with her. And in the end, he ends up revealing to her that he's the Son of God, the one that people have been waiting for and looking for. And she goes back to her town and begins to tell everybody about him. And I find it interesting how the Bible says that she went back and she told people, this man told me everything that I've ever done. Like that was how she shared her faith. Like all the good stuff, all the bad stuff, he knows it. Which you think, probably not the best way to share your faith, but in her mind, like this blew her mind, so I've just got to share the story. And so that's the context of what's going on. She's going back to tell her village about Jesus, and Jesus is now debriefing with his disciples. And he's trying to help them wrap their minds around the mission of seeking and saving the lost. And while he's in the middle of explaining it to his disciples, he looks up and he sees this woman has told this village, and the entire village is coming out to meet him. And I want you to notice what Jesus says here in John chapter 4, in verse 35. He says to his disciples, do not say that there are yet 4 months, and then comes the harvest. Look, I tell you, lift up your eyes and see the fields are white for harvest. And so Jesus sees these people coming from the village, and he uses a farming analogy that probably really doesn't resonate with a lot of us, but living in this farming culture, they would have understood. He was given an analogy of a wheat field. I don't know if anybody's farmed wheat around Irvine, Orange County lately. No? Okay. Maybe we're in like Iowa or something. I don't know. But he gives this wheat analogy, and when they would grow wheat, the farmers could visibly tell that the wheat was ready to be harvested because the tops, the heads of the wheat would actually turn white. And that told the farmer that, yep, it's time to go and harvest the wheat. It's ripe. And so he says this to his disciples, but he says this as he's looking at a group of people. And the analogy that he was saying to them is, he's saying to them, listen, there is a harvest. There's a spiritual harvest that is coming. And this is what I've been preparing you for. And I want you to know, it's not something that's going to happen in the distant future. It's not something that's happening in a foreign land. He's trying to help his disciples take it from this big, broad mission of saving the world and bring it down to right here and say, look, it's happening now. And it's happening right here in front of your eyes. And these people right here, and for the disciples, it was difficult because they imagined it happening first with their own people, with Jews. And yet these people are not Jews. And Jesus is like, here is the harvest. I want you to see it. The mission is taking place right here in front of you with these people. And in the same way, I think you and I, as followers of Jesus, we have to move from this idea, like we talked about last week, of the global mission of Jesus. We have to understand it like, yes, Jesus came to save the world, right? He made that very clear. Every race, every tribe, every tongue. But how many of you know, when we talk about embracing a global mission, that seems a little bit big, right? Like a little bit overwhelming. Like, hey, go out there and save the world. Like, oh, okay, where do we start? And so what we're doing today is we're trying to move from the global mission of Jesus, which is big and overwhelming, to seeing the mission as local and personal. And what that means is us engaging the mission of Jesus in our social circles. The reality is every single one of us have social circles. You may have never thought about your life and the people that you know as social circles. You may not have a graphic drone like this with all of the people in it. That would be a little bit weird if we found that. But the reality is we all have these social circles that we are a part of, right? And you can really break it down to where you live, where you work, where you play, and where you study. You think about where you live. That's really simple to understand. That includes your family. That includes your neighbors that live in close proximity to you. You think about where you work, that's your coworkers, that could be your clients. Where you play, that's, I don't know, maybe you're in a bowling league or something like that, or you've got a group of guys you play golf with on a regular basis, or for you parents, it's those kids' sports teams, the soccer team, the baseball team, whatever it is, that's where you have relationships with people based upon some kind of common interest, right? And then, of course, where you study. And for some of you, you're like, I'm way past school, so this doesn't apply to you. But for some of you, you're in high school, you're in college, you're going back to school. And this is a social circle for you. It's your friends, it's your peers, it's your teacher. And so these people in these social circles that we rub bases with on a regular basis, here's what I want us to get today. That the mission of Jesus has to go from global and big and way out there and amazing, and it has to come all the way down to right here. And this is what Jesus is wanting us to do, to take our actual social circles, the people that we know, that we rub shoulders with on a regular basis, just in the everyday, boring, mundane rhythms of life. And he's wanting us to take the mission of Jesus and kind of lay it over it and to see our social circles through that lens, to make it local, to make it personal. But here's what I know, like as we talk about that, it's like, okay, I get that in concept. But usually there's some pushback, all right? Usually we have some doubts, we have some negativity, we have some things that we've just believed all of our lives as truth, and we kind of come to the point where we say, but you don't know my social circles. The people that, when it becomes personal, becomes more difficult to believe and act out. When it's all theoretical, it's like, yeah, let's save the world. But now we're talking about people that we know. We know their faces, we know their personalities, we know some of their beliefs. And so there's this pushback inside of us that goes, oh, no, not my social circles. And what I want to do for the next few moments is I want us to begin to think more like Jesus and his disciples did. Because what Jesus was doing, not only was he showing them and saying, look, your social circle right here in front of you, this is the mission. But he also told them, he said, it's a field that's what? It's white unto harvest. It's ripe. In other words, he's saying, listen, I'm telling you, there are people right here in front of you who really do want to know Jesus. They really do want to follow me. They're searching for something in their life, and Jesus is trying to get them to open their eyes and look up and see that. And so that's where we're going to go over the next few minutes. And I think in order to get there, right, like most things in the Christian life, it's going to take some faith. Okay? Do we believe faith's a big component of Christianity? It's going to take some faith. But let me just clarify that word, because I think sometimes some of us hear faith and we think blind faith. And I don't believe in blind faith. I had someone tell me this week, well, you just got to believe. I'm like, I don't know about that. I think when the Bible talks about faith, it's a real faith. It's not just, I hope so. Like, I have enough belief to believe Santa's coming this year. And, if we get enough people, then, he'll come. I'm not saying like that kind of faith. I'm talking about a real faith that's based on facts, on something that's really coming true and really happening. But I want us to create some faith in believing that God is doing something in our social circles, okay? And so I'm going to talk about 3 things today we've got to believe. Number 1, believe that the people in your social circles are open to spiritual conversations. Again, Pastor, you don't know my social circles. Like maybe the people that pastors run with like to talk about spiritual things and are open to that kind of stuff, but not my people that I work with or people in my community. I don't think they're even open to having that discussion. And a lot of us have that soundtrack playing in our mind, okay? And that soundtrack plays over and over and over, and we just start believing it, and so we just start acting accordingly, right? Like if no one is open to it, then why would we say anything? Because obviously it'll just get shut down before the conversation ever gets going. And so we just become these kind of secret agent Christians, and we keep our faith undercover, and we never let anyone know about it. But I wonder what would happen if we questioned that assumption. Is everyone in our circle really close to the idea of following Jesus, of Christianity, of the gospel? And I want to give us just a few stats again. While we're sharing stats, let's share a few more today. And again, this is from Barna Research, and this is nationwide, okay? They said 74%, this is just from last year, by the way, so these aren't old stats. Last year, 74% of adults say they want to grow spiritually. These are not Christian adults. This is just adults across America that were asked, and they said, yeah, I would like to grow spiritually. 71% of Americans view Jesus positively. And I think sometimes I don't know if we get it from the news or where we get it, we have this idea that everyone is against Christianity. Everyone hates Jesus and all this kind of stuff. And that's just not true. 71% actually have a positive view. 77% of Gen Z feels motivated to learn more about Jesus. These are some of the really encouraging stats that are coming out in research over the past couple of years. Really happens around Gen Z. Now, here's what I know. Every generation likes to criticize the generation behind them, right? Like, that's just a human thing. It's kind of like when you go to school, and you're a senior, and you look around and you're like, oh, these ninth graders are so small and weird. And you just forgot that you were there, right? They're not small and weird. It's the same. You feel like they are because now you're senior. And it's the same thing with generation to generation. I hope our church never buys into that. I think it's dumb for a church to criticize the generation behind them. I think we should be investing in the generation and lifting them up. And the reality is, Gen Z, there's a ton of positive things coming out about them. Barna has actually nicknamed them the open generation. And what they're finding is Gen Z is even far more open to spiritual things and Christianity than millennials were. Sorry, millennials, we keep getting a bad rap. But Gen Z is really open to these things. And I think that's amazing. I think that's exciting. I think there's potential for a new revival to come to America, to come to California, and it may happen. Usually it happens in a younger generation, right? I was sitting outside of Pete's Coffee here in Irvine a few months ago, and I overheard some kids from a local high school, and they were sitting together, and they were having coffee, and they were doing homework, and I heard Jesus, and I was like, oh, okay, And so my ears perk up, and I start listening. I'm like, all right, what are these kids going to say about Jesus? And after a few moments of conversation, I realized that some of them in the group were believers, and some were not. But it was interesting to me how they talked about faith, and they kind of flowed in and out of one subject, back to faith, and out to another subject, and back to faith. But it was this conversation that was never weird. It was never awkward. It was never forced. There wasn't, from the Christian side, there wasn't this judgment of, you should believe this. But from the other side, there was never this pushback of what you believe is dumb. It was just a very normal conversation. And I thought to myself, man, that's awesome. Like, that's how we should be talking about our faith, right? We should just be talking about Jesus like he's real, because he is, and not getting weirded out about it and using judgmental tactics, and we'll get all into that later. But the point is that people are not actually closed off to the gospel. They're very open to spiritual things. And this shouldn't surprise us, because it's part of being human. We were created by a God who created us for the purpose of having a relationship with him. And you've probably heard this before, that every person's created with a God-sized hole in their heart that can only be filled by a relationship with God. And that's absolutely true. So let's not forget that the person who even says, I'm an atheist, and I hate God, or I don't believe in God, let's not forget that it doesn't change the fact of how they were created. Ecclesiastes chapter 3 and verse 11 says, he has made everything beautiful in its time. And also he put eternity into man's heart, yet so that he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. The idea he's getting at there is that God in every person's heart has planted this seed of eternity to know there's more to life than just this. There's more than just this world. And so I say all that to say that even in your circle, your social circle, that people are open to spiritual conversations. We're going to talk more in a couple weeks about how to have those conversations, but know that they're open. Number 2, believe that the gospel is truly good news for the people in your social circle. Believe that it's good news for them. We don't have a difficult time sharing good news, do we? Who likes to share good news? Who likes to share bad news? Some of you are like, yes, bad news, that's the best. No, we love to share good news. You parents, if your kid is trying hard to make the sports team, the soccer team, and they put a lot of effort and they tried out for it, and they're waiting to find out if they make it, and you get the email, it's like, hey, your kid's on the team. What do? If you're a decent parent, you hide it from them, right? Like, I'm not telling them. I'm going to punish my kids. No, you go to them and like, hey, good news. Guess what? You made the team. Your spouse loses their car keys, which can happen in some households on a regular basis, right? Your spouse loses their car keys and they can't find them, and you spend hours and hours and maybe even days looking for them, and you find them. If you're a good spouse, what do? You go to them. Hey, good news. I found the car keys. Why? Because we all love sharing good news. The word gospel literally means good news. That's what it means. We talked about the kind of the overview of the gospel last week. If we can put that on the screen, this is just kind of a symbolic way that explains the gospel. And it's a reminder to us that the world started, where you see the heart, the world started good and it was great and it was perfect. But mankind ran away from that perfect world, ran away from God, rebelled against that. And what we ran to was lostness. We ran to brokenness. Broken relationships and sin permeated our world, and sin permeated our lives. And we found ourselves, like we said last week, in a place of lostness, incapable of restoring ourselves to a relationship with God or rescuing ourselves from the power and the penalty of sin. But there at the bottom, this is the good news. And the good news is that Jesus came, that he died, he was buried, and he resurrected, so that we could be restored to a relationship with God and rescued from the power and penalty of sin. That's good news. And the good news, it's good news, first of all, for eternity, right? The good news that Jesus literally rescues us from an eternity in hell and gives us the promise of heaven. That's really good news. But let's not forget that it's not just about after we die good news. And sometimes we kind of get like that, right? Like we think, oh, well, it's just kind of fire insurance, or it's like, heaven after you die. But no, Christianity, when Jesus talked about it being good news, it permeated not just the next life, but it permeated this life as well. It's good news for the here and now. And that's why Jesus said in John 10 and verse 10, the thief comes only to steal and to kill and to destroy, but I came that they might have life, and that they might have it what? Abundantly. When Jesus said, I came that they might have life, he could have used the Greek word bio, which was for like biological life, but he didn't say it. He didn't say that. He used a Greek word called zoe, which means abundant, overflowing life. And Jesus said, I came that they would have zoe life, overflowing life that would overflow so much it would start in this life and it would continue into the next. And that's what Jesus had in mind. And by the way, that's what Jesus has in mind for people in our social circles. And sometimes it's harder to see, like if you're in a social circle and everybody, his life is going poorly and they're struggling, it's easier to see that, yeah, they need some good news, right? But sometimes when you're in an area like Orange County and the outside, the exterior of the house looks good and the car looks good and what they post on social media looks good, sometimes it's hard to see that they actually need good news too. But the reality is they do. And you know this, we know this, that behind the good-looking house and behind the job, it's really all the same problems. We're all the same when you get down underneath, right? And every single person in my social circle, in your social circle, needs the gospel, because the gospel is really good news for the next life and for this life. But then lastly, today, we need to believe that Jesus is already working in our social circles. He's already working. I think one of the most difficult things when we as a church start talking about sharing our faith, one of the most difficult things is sometimes we feel this pressure to be the ones to convert our friends, right? Like we feel this pressure to be the ones to make the sale. Like I've got to convince them to completely change their worldview. And I've got a 5-minute conversation to do it. I just got to put all the cards on the table, and I've got to convince them, and I got to convince everybody in my social circle to do that. And that's really stressful, right? Like that's a lot of weight to feel, that I've got to get someone to completely change their worldview and follow Jesus like I do. And that's a lot of pressure, and that's a lot of weight. That's a daunting task to argue someone into following Jesus. But the reality is that's not how it works. In Matthew chapter 28, verse 19, we've probably read this verse more than any other verse of scripture here at Grace City. But this is Jesus giving the mission to his disciples, and he says, go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to observe all that I've commanded you. And here's the part I want to get to. And do it in your own strength, right? Is that what it says? Do all of this, evangelize your social circle, and argue them with your best methods. It's not what it says. It says, and behold, I'm with you always to the end of the age. Don't miss this. That the promise of Jesus in us living out his mission where we live, work, play, and study is that he actually goes with us. And that he is actually already working there. And that's the confidence. That's something we have to believe, because if I'm entering into this, my social circles on my own, and I have to convince all these people of these things, that's a difficult task. But if I actually believe that, you know what, Jesus is already working in their hearts, that he's pursuing them. And for some of us, we have to think back to the fact that one day he was pursuing us when we were lost and we were far away from him. If you're here today and you know Jesus, there was a day when you didn't, right? And for some of you, maybe you got to think way back, but there was a time. And Jesus began to work in your heart and in your life. He began moving in situations, and he used certain people to come in and to share the gospel with you and to influence you to bring you to the point you're at today. And here's the thing you got to know. You're just not that different than anybody else. I'm not that different. The same God, the same Jesus that worked in us, that showed us our need for him, that brought us to a point of saying, I need to put my faith in him. He's working in your friends. There's students that you sit by and you wonder, I wonder if they even think about God. No, they do. He's working in them. Your coworker, you're thinking that's the last person on this planet that would ever give their life to Jesus. I'm telling you, he's pursuing them. And he's working in their life. And we have to know that he is already at work. Why? Because it's what he does. He's a missionary God. He is on mission. He is pursuing people, and he wants to work in tandem with us in our social circles. So here's how I want us to end our service today. In your seat, there's a card. Looks like this. Could you guys grab that card? It says, for the one. Or on the back, leaves the 99. And if you were here 6 months ago, we did this as a church. Remember that? We thought about the ones that Jesus is pursuing. And we wrote their names down on a card. And we put them in this box. If you're new, that's what this box is. These are names of hundreds of people that our church has some kind of relationship or contact with that we're praying for to begin following Jesus. The awesome thing is we've had a number of these already make the choice to follow Jesus. That's awesome, and we're gonna see more. And here's where I want us to begin today, okay? Because there's no doubt God brought some people to your mind, even as I was talking. But I think the great place to start is a place of prayer. We start in prayer with humble recognition of, Lord, I know the gospel, but God, there are people that I have relationships with who don't. And Jesus, it's overwhelming. It's too big for me to even accomplish something like that and to even have the faith that you are pursuing them. But Lord, I just want to come, and today I want to begin praying over some people specifically that you would work in their life. And so what I want to invite you to do is, as we start in that place, I want to invite you here in just a moment to open that card and to write down 3 names. Now, let me give you some boundaries, okay? These 3 names have to be in your social circle. These are not people that live on the other side of the world, unless you're on a Zoom call with them every week. I guess that could be social circle, okay? But these are people that fall in one of those 4 groups: where you live, where you work, where you play, where you study. You rub shoulders with them. They don't know Jesus, but you've got a relationship with them. And today you're going to start praying for them. And then there's one that's called the long shot, right? This is the one in your social circle, you're like, not happening. They're not following Jesus. I don't care. There's nothing in this world that can do it. It'd be a miracle from God if they started following Jesus. And I want you to put that person's name on that line. That's your long shot, okay? And so I'm going to pray, and then we're going to do our response and reflection time. And during our response and reflection time, I want you to write these cards down. And after we've given everybody a moment to do that, I'm going to invite you to come and put them in this box, okay? So can we pray together?